Hi everyone, my name's Josh Gallagher. I'm MediaCom's Chief Product Officer for APAC, and we're here today on LinkedIn Live for Loop Live. Loop Live is MediaCom's weekly insight into the media and marketing industry. We're hoping to have some really inspirational yet practical advice on navigating our new way of working, internally but also externally with how we do our work in a media and marketing place. As I said, I'm Josh Gallagher. I'm going to take you through a presentation today, but first I want to introduce you to Neelesh. Neelesh is going to join me a little bit later on to answer some questions about what to keep top of mind for marketers, and no better than Neelesh to do that because he is one of Southeast Asia's preeminent marketers and used to changing how brands grow within this market. I'll get Neelesh to do a little bit of an introduction before we jump into it.
Hi, and thanks a lot, Josh. Really pleased to be here. I've been working in Southeast Asia for the last 15 or so years, worked across many countries, and yes, my passion is marketing. I used to working in very large brands as well as small brands, so I'm really looking forward to the session today and sharing with you some of the things that I've learned over these last years.
Great, thanks Neelesh. I'm going to jump into the presentation now. If anyone has any questions as they go through, they can pop them in the comments box, and if we do get time, we'll try and answer them at the end, but hopefully some of the questions that I'm going to ask Neelesh will cover some of the things that are on people's mind this year. So we've already kind of started this year. I'm sure, like me, everyone's had a really fast start to the year, and in this part of the world, back after Chinese New Year. But looking back at 2020, if it taught us anything, is that sometimes talk is cheap. For a long time, we'd spoken about disruption, inevitable change, without really having to do anything about it. Trends, to a certain extent, when we'd done them in the past, had become really empty promises. That is until we reach moments like last year where growth, but also decline, seemed exponential, and they still seem exponential. We're seeing it in real time, and certainly now we can feel some of that change. And this year exposed many brands. If anyone followed the Loop Live last year, we spoke a lot about those kinds of brands that were coping with change really well. But those brands, marketers, and some of our partners really felt the impact that one moment can have, and a really big moment at that. Warren Buffett's quote, "Only when the tide goes out do we see who's been swimming naked," has never been more true than now. Last year, we saw omni-channel retail become relevant for absolutely everyone. Everyone's talking about e-commerce. And I really get the sense that it's going to be a common topic here on the Loop Live APAC as we go through the year. Getting ahead of consumer expectation and the pace at which people are changing their purchasing online is really going to be critical. This year, we're going to see another big change, and it's something that I'm calling the owned explosion. Very soon, we're going to lose third-party cookies, so how we track people's behavior online. Out of this, what will go is our understanding of online identity, and experiences will really change. Acting too late, and just like we have in the past saying it'll be okay, will certainly leave brands really short of growth. And most importantly, as we talk about big fundamental changes in how people consume things, fundamental changes in how we need to capture data, to use that to target people, we need to change our organizations, how companies augment their operations to cater for these changes, getting rid of silos in the way that really get in the way of end-to-end retail experiences, or ensure that you're capturing that data from great online experiences, are all factors in the questions that I'm going to ask around, is your organization really set up for success this year? I'm going to do that by talking about 3 O's to keep you in the loop this year and for you to keep in your loop. So we're going to go through today 3 really practical things that I think have changed the way that we need to work and how you can implement them day to day. The first one is omni-channel velocity. We'll firstly talk about this and the need for marketers and brands to not just catch up, but be really anticipatory in experiences for consumers. Not just react to things that they're doing, but get in front of experiences, change the way that we think about our relationships with consumers. We need to recognize as well that physical and retail experiences are complementary, but they're not the same. Selling online isn't governed by the same constraints. In physical stores, the aisle or the position on shelf is fixed. Online, you have the ability to really drive affinity with complementary products and show a really deep understanding of consumers' desire in products. This has been really important because over the last 12 months, something has flipped, right? We've seen online retailers tip the scale in the importance of that first contact. Making that first contact online is more influential than ever. And that experience needs to be much different than just a transactional experience. 63% of customers now visit a retail site before they even go to the physical. So there's 3 things that we need to take away from that for successful brands. Firstly, we need to think about how communities can drive moments. Influencers are having a huge effect on commerce, particularly through things like live streaming, right, which is growing by 40 times in the region. Last year, on a live streaming channel, in her live streaming room, a Chinese live streamer single-handedly sold over $6 billion worth of products, more than the annual China sales of some of the bigger physical grocery chains within the region. But it's not just influencers, it's everyday people that add magic into conversion. Second thing we're going to talk about is people are really used to having conversations in store. So why not take them online as well? Conversational commerce is on the cusp of taking over and an opportunity to really supercharge creativity and think about how we change experiences for people online. It will also help from turning brands from really transaction orientated into relationship orientated brands. So we're going to go from selling to engaging with retailers, so having to sell our products to a Lazada or a Shopee, to actually selling and engaging with consumers by making your brand conversational and replicating that omni-channel experience. And finally, we're going to think about shifting from a one-size-fits-all to really personal relevance. We've seen that in the past shift purchase intent by up to 25%. And that's what most marketers want. They want that conversion at point of sale, but we're going to need to start do that by being relevant. I'm going to play you an example soon of how data can be used not just to target people, but really put magic in the conversion by applying it to a really unique product relevant situation. And it's a campaign by Bose where they've used sound to discount. But I'm going to show you that case study right now.
Right across the country. The good news is
All right, so I think that's a really good example of how we can use data in a different way. Not just data to fuel purchase, not just data in a retail environment to target people and put average creative in more relevant places. That's about how we can use data to create great experiences, but also link it into purchase. The second big thing we're going to talk about is this owned explosion, right? 70% of all impressions online still use cookies as a targeting method. That's going to go. This over-reliance on those deterministic methods are not only leaving us, but they're leaving us with a legacy of bad online experiences. Many brands have handed over their own brands even to marketplaces like Amazon and Lazada, or even online retailers, and that's been a big issue. The change in experience, the losing the control of an experience has really created an identity crisis for a lot of our brands. So consider a typical shopping experience on a digital marketplace. Whether consumers want to buy a $40,000 luxury watch or a $4 bargain shampoo, the experience is actually shockingly similar, right? Every product detail page looks exactly the same. It's an uninspiring image of the product against a soulless white background, and it's become the standard for how we sell things online. Once we take cookies and targeting away, we're going to have to think a little bit more about how we use owned media to more benefit. Change the way we think about targeting at the moment, not only to get the same experience for two wildly different products, I'm targeted by them in exactly the same environment. Changing the way that we think about experiences online helps us build more relevant experience. And of course, the better experience, the more consumers want to come to you on your own channels. Just a transaction isn't enough to build up first-party data. Have meaningful customer experiences to build that lake of data. You need more people spending more on your assets. So the owned explosion, we're going to talk about, firstly, now may not be the time to make broad changes to your approach, but preparation is really key. I spoke at the start about not just that mindset of it'll be okay, but do you have avenues for first-party data collection? How are you managing it, and how is it going to be used? Now's the time to really get educated and establish avenues for organizational alignment and test and learn philosophies. To get that data, secondly, you need interaction. What new experiences are really critical on your owned asset? So motivation for online and seamless qualities of free delivery, easy checkout are already there. There's now that we've gone through that revolution of online experiences and online shopping. Consumers now want a deeper connection. 29% of consumers want their experience to be entertaining. And we spoke a little bit about live streaming before. That's really important as we go from that $4 shampoo experience to even things like buying a car online. And finally, think about content first on your retail platforms. Building up the initial visibility of a new product or a brand will help generate sales, subsequently contributing to the build-up of an organic rank. Then we accelerate with paid media. Finally, I'm going to really quickly talk about organizational alignment. 2020 accelerated many existing organizational trends, from the adoption of new speed-enhancing operating models to a growing emphasis on values and purpose that infiltrated business. Importantly, consumers have adapted really quickly. 10 years of progress happened in just 10 months. But my question is, have brands, marketers, and agencies kept speed? Have they adopted the models that facilitate fitter, flatter, and faster operations in decision-making? So a couple of things in here. We're going to talk about organizational augmentation. Adopting new models for speed. Among the many challenges, organizations had to rapidly adopt and scale these new models. We're talking about agile operations, helping organizations speed up and thrive during these times. And they're really high stakes times as well, where growth was on the line. Secondly, it's a focus on faster decision making. We saw how quickly things could change last year. And in today's business landscape, a delayed decision can be worse than a wrong decision. And finally, an increased shift towards organizing for the future. Yes, we've had huge change in the past 12 months, but we still need to think about the future and what that holds. Ask the kind of questions like, who are we? How do we operate? How do we grow? These are three really pressing questions leaders are asking as they prepare their organizations and build operating models around networks of teams, unprecedented industry collaboration, and more human companies defined by purpose. So that's a bit of a 3x3 from me. Three big areas and a couple of questions. Now I'm going to hand over, I'm going to ask Neelesh a couple of questions because I think I want to get a marketer's perspective. That's an agency perspective that we've got, but then putting that into the real world to go, how are we coping with this? So if I bring Neelesh on now, I'll start with my first question. So the first question, I'm going to move back a little bit to the start and kind of ask around the benefits of omni-channel experiences. How do you see the benefits of e-commerce in many industries as a growth driver, when for some, perhaps in CPGs or FMCGs, it wasn't a really big contributor of sales traditionally?
Thanks for the question, Josh. To answer that in a very short way first, I never really see e-commerce as a percentage contributor to sales, because yes, in most CPG companies, it kind of falls below 5%. What I see it as is really, and what I measure it as really is as a percentage contributor to the growth, where it contributes more than 25-30% of the growth. And really, honestly, everybody is measured on growth and not on the absolute number, as we know. So kind of to make it succinct and kind of get to the point, e-commerce really, in my view, particularly where it is still nascent in the companies, large traditional CPG companies, that's the right way of looking at it. Now going to omnichannel, I mean, look, there's a famous quote by David Ogilvy, right? I mean, I learn a lot from my agency friends, so I really value their perspective. And the quote is that the consumer isn't someone else, she's your wife. And somehow marketers kind of fall into the error of thinking it's someone else. Consumer is really the same as us. We make decisions about products. We refer to multiple sources of information, multiple channels. You saw the statistic already. So multi-screen planning, activation is beyond doubt a necessity to build mental availability, and similarly building physical availability, providing access. We need to be present in both offline and online channels, and this phenomena happens everywhere. I mean, people like us who were first planning media now only on TV can no longer rely because the TV reach curve flattens out so fast that you can't reach the people that you really want to reach. Similarly, most people, and you saw the stat, visit an online store. Why not? I don't want to visit a offline store directly. When I was hunting for a TV, I kind of really browsed around, saw everything, and then went to one store once. So that's really reality. So if we have to engage people, we have to enable browsing online and maybe even purchasing online. Another thing is we know how important word of mouth and reviews and interaction with people is in buying decisions. And people ask their friends, family, larger circle of acquaintances before they buy. And now, especially with COVID, where people are not really going and talking to other people are turning more and more to online ways. And I think this comes back to the piece on conversational commerce that you referred to, Josh. So I think it's no longer a benefit per se; it's a necessity now.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I think the point that you make around it not just being a transaction online, or that's what I take of it now. The online isn't just about making a transaction. We need to think differently about those experiences as well. So it kind of leads into my second question. So my second question is around, we now have a different asset, right? We have an online asset that is important, maybe not a big contributor to sales, but a big to growth. So how important do you see that asset? Yes, it's driving growth and we're capturing that growth at the moment. But what else do you see as part of it? We talk about owned assets, not always from growth, but its ability for people to go and have a nice experience, but then also to be able to capture data. So there's a practical reason on there, or there's a couple of practical reasons on there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not an easy choice because the costs involved, and to be practical, costs involved in managing own media are quite substantial, and in many cases the capabilities involved are quite intricate as well. But I'd answer that on two levels. The first is sort of philosophical kind of thing, and the second one is a lot more practical. So the first point here is, like, a brand is essentially a narrative. That's what a brand really is. And why would we hand over our narrative to some other publisher completely and lose control over it fully? I mean, you can just think of it in the real world. A good parallel is, for example, the restaurant delivery business, right? All the food apps that are there, and they've managed to bring access to restaurants to a much wider base of customers. But at the same time, restaurants are now realizing that essentially what they're doing is they're handing over their customers to be part of the database of these apps. And that's what we would do if we don't really make our presence felt. So I think we need to strike a balance between getting access to new users, which is why we use other media in the first place, getting new users, new customers, and as well as building and retaining and having richer conversation with the customers who are already interested in us. And so we can only do this if we own and we can direct the experience that these customers have once they engage with us. And sometimes it's just nice to have a home on the internet. So that's really on the sort of more philosophical or more principle kind of led argument. A more practical one is, for me, I'm a big believer in search. I'm really a big believer in the power of search. And this is really where people have displayed the intent and interest in your category, in your brand. So winning here is absolutely critical. And honestly, you can't do that unless you're some big organization who can really throw a lot of money in SEM. You can't do that unless and until you really own assets and have a strong content management plan to really, really win. And so I think owned assets will be really the destination for most marketers. Eventually we know we are moving to more purpose-led brands. You also alluded to that. And eventually brands that thrive will be brands that have a deep purpose. And so our owned assets will not just be about the product that we sell, but about the purpose we stand for. And really that's where the engagement will come in. And that's where we need to be, somewhere where consumers can engage with us.
So I think that's a good point. So hopefully this leads into my comment on that leads into the next question. We've been talking about purpose and those kinds of things for a long time within marketing. So I think from that overall brand perspective, we've got a pretty good handle on how that works and how we should act. It's shifted a little in terms of the way that we need to act in e-commerce, and I don't know if we've got that balance right. But I think with all of those shifts that are happening, my big question to you and to a lot of marketers is, are we really set up for this change? Have we set up properly to be able to change? And that's about speed of decision. That's about making decisions. That's being prepared for what's to come. So I think my last question will be around, how can marketers get set up for change and really take on some of these things that we've been perhaps talking about for a long time, but we're kind of forced to implement in the last 12 months or 10 months?
Oh, that's a $1 million, or maybe $1 million is nothing nowadays. It's $1 billion question. I think, and many consultancies, large consultancies, have written papers and papers on how do we organize for this transformation. In short, what I've seen and what I've experienced myself is that the first thing to realize that the most precious resource that any organization has is its information. And really, brands and companies that win are the ones who can take this information available, make sure everybody has access to it, and translate it into some kind of competitive edge. And so only organizations which can do that in an agile way can actually succeed. And we've seen many examples of that. And there are full organizations, multi-billion-dollar companies now who are actually helping this kind of a transformation. Another thing is sort of like a boundaryless way of working to enable this kind of information flow and a free exchange of ideas. So this siloed specialization and empire building kind of chains organizations up, and now we're moving to a sort of model where SWAT teams, task forces, call it what you will, have become almost a norm of operating. You see this happening in all this entire gig economy. So companies need to leverage the power of specialists and partners to actually win and do that in a fast way. And the companies who can do that will be the ones who will be able to create the kind of content and currency that will create this edge for their brands. The third point is sort of a mindset shift from perfectionism to test, learn, repeat. And I think CPG marketers don't do this really very well. IT marketers or IT companies do this a lot better, particularly because it's in them. The product is a lot more in their control. But I tweak this and I learn, and then I come back and tweak something else and continuously learn, rather than having this sitting on something and trying to hatch it and make it perfect. That's really key also to win in this new way of operating. And all of this really comes down to, are we truly a consumer-centric organization? Do all our different functions, do all our different divisions really translate into some sort of a thing which has meaning to the consumer, or are they all just following their own KPIs? And this is incredibly hard, but of course, a very necessary transformation that everybody needs to undertake in order to be able to win now.
I think that's a really great last point. There was a question that came through while you were talking. I don't know if it came through while you were talking or just before, but it was around how the gig economy can help shape us from a marketing point of view. And you kind of spoke about it, but I think the thing that those kinds of brands do really well is they're just consumer focused, and that's how they started. They were there to solve a consumer problem, not just have a product that they're trying to sell. And I think organizationally, but also from a marketing perspective, that's a really good learning from a lot of those brands on how they work and how they've thrived and kind of survived through this time as well. So I think that's time for us now. We've only got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to do a bit of a wrap up, but thank you so much for joining. I thought that was really helpful from Neelesh. Thanks everyone else for joining. Next week, we're joined by Chris Myers. He's going to delve into Group M's proprietary Consumer Eye, which is a marketing technology report that he's put out as part of a research over the last 12 months. We're going to look at some shifts in media consumption across the region and be really APAC specific in terms of the effect COVID had on me, and things like streaming, data privacy. And again, we're going to talk about e-commerce. So I'm going to leave you now. Thank you once again. If you want to join next week and you're not part of our regular CRM, we're going to put a link to next week's topic in the chat, in the comments section, so people can join up. In the event page, there's a link to next week's topic, and we'll keep rolling that through as we go through. Pop us an email and we can add you to the constant communication that we have, that will wrap up some of the learnings that we've had this week and then tell you about that we've got on next week. So thank you once again from MediaCom and the Loop Live APAC. We'll be here every week throughout the year for a short 20 to 30 minute presentation on what's happening inside media and marketing minds throughout the year. So thank you.